Welcome back to Mahamudra for the People. I'm sorry I couldn't be here last week. I wasn't feeling well, but I'm feeling well now. So, and today there's actually a specific two little quotes I'd like to kind of work on with you all with respect to practice. But to start off, it would be nice if we could sit for a bit. And in this moment, we can either do, you could do whatever Mahamudra practice you're doing at this time. It could be shamatha, in which case one is resting comfortably, if you can, with your legs crossed, hands either on your knees or in meditation mudra in your lap, shoulders spread wide like wings of a vulture, neck slightly bent down, jaw comfortable, no tension, no performance anxiety need be maintained. Gaze open, relaxed. Sometimes they say the tongue resting gently on the roof of the mouth. Allow breath to be natural. Allow yourself to stabilize into this experience using the 12/6 nails. So letting go of the past, letting go of the future, letting go of this particular moment. With nothing to control, nothing to do. So allow yourself to rest directly and freely into this experience of mind as it arises. I'll sit like this for 10 minutes. Slowly. As you feel comfortable or whatever, bring yourself back to this group. Um, I hope everyone's doing well. Um, so I think the first thing I want to share comes from this quote from uh, Tilopa. I'm wrapping up a short essay for Lion's Roar for I think the November issue about leaving New York City Department of Correction. And in the initial draft, quoted Shantideva because I used to try and bring Shantideva in with me to work as much as I could. Quote Shantideva at graduation ceremonies, and I did most of the, in fact, all of the invocations and um, uh, benedictions for all kind of formal events, so funerals and graduations and promotion ceremonies and all sorts of things. And speak on behalf of New York City Department of Corrections. I used to do that, annually at West Point and all these places. So they're all like really weird, not me kinds of places to be. And I would pepper wherever I was, like, Johnny Bodhiseed with, Shantideva, for example. So that all of these people, and sometimes our biggest graduation class was 1,000 people, and each person had 4 families, so it was 5,000 people at Madison Square Garden, and I was able to recite Shantideva there. But in this piece, I kind of realized that there wasn't anything really non-dual, and so I added this passage, which I want to just share with you all. This comes from Tilopa, and Tilopa says that to transcend the apprehended, so what is being experienced, quote unquote, externally, but also internally, mind, right? The matrix of our senses as well. An apprehender, right? So Cloud or Jan or Travis or everybody here, myself included. So to transcend the apprehended and apprehender is the king of views. In a certain way, it's kind of like a flattening and making perhaps more vivid this experience. For anybody who's a love of physics, this kind of idea of how electricity is conducted through various kinds of media, um, pure media like gold, for example. There's not a lot of loss of energy through heat, right? But then something like iron in particular, it's not such a good conductor, right? And so there's loss of energy by heat, right? So what we're kind of looking at is resting into this experience that transcends apprehended and apprehender, thereby removing the friction, right? Removing the tension, removing the complexity, so to speak, of storytelling and the like, so that all we're doing is directly experiencing. So this is the king of the views, according to Tilopa. And of course, when we really begin to kind of get into this, like, there are all these radical applications and radical implications of this. In a certain way, we're cutting out the middleman, right? So just direct, direct. direct, direct. There's no middleman trying to make a profit on our experience with their shady coat open. Look what I got to sell. Just, we're being pushed right in. So the first is to transcend the apprehended and apprehender. The second is to be without distraction, is the king of meditation. We're going to get into this a little bit, but what does that not mean? That doesn't mean practicing with a furrowed brow, super intense, clenching your sphincter, like holding your body super tight, right? It's not that. It's not getting a headache, right? If you're feeling tense here, you're not, you're doing something weird, you're getting tense, you're not really focused, right? You're actually distracting yourself by doing something. And Tilopa says that to be free of effort is the king of conduct. Right now, loose, like my best friend's sister, when I was really young, we were in elementary school, she turned to my mom once and asked if she would help her sew a button onto a fried egg. And my mom was just like, what are you talking about? And she's like, I don't know. And it's still kind of like something we joke about, still, this kind of like, being free from effort, being not necessarily being weird, but like not being heady, not saying therefore this, therefore that, putting books away, putting things away, putting structure away, putting good and bad away, putting all this other stuff. So being free from effort is the king of conduct, and we're going to get into this a little bit too. And then to be without hope and fear is the king of results. Of course, we could make it queen, or some other person. It doesn't have to be the king of all these things, being king or whatever, right? To be free from hope or fear. And when we really kind of parse this out in practice, whether it's formal practice, like what we're kind of doing, is expectation that something will happen, and being lifted out of this particular situation where I'm experiencing suffering. And this is very easy to say, and this is exceptionally hard to do. I'm preparing for, I guess, a month, maybe a little bit longer in Asia, in Sikkim, and then in Bhutan. And I'm excited about going back to Sikkim. I haven't been there in a while. And I'm also, it's like a very serious thing too, for some reason, coming back to see Gyaltsen Rinpoche, one of my teachers. And there's a real strong part of me that's like, oh, I don't need to go. Mind is free and open and spacious everywhere. And then there's another part of me that knows, oh, I should go and see Rinpoche and seek blessings from him and continue to get instruction and these things from him. But it's not really ultimately necessary. And to be able to practice like this, where we are not striving because there's nothing to run after, there's nothing to chase, there's nothing to cultivate, there's nothing to have to build, have to transform. This is very hard, It's kind of like going to the doctor when you're going to get a shot. Actually, I had to go to the doctor yesterday to get a vitamin B shot. And, you're getting a shot, so you feel more. And to walk into spaces without hope, without fear, is to really walk into spaces without expectation, without ideas, without self, essentially, without with this kind of, like the first point that Tilopa brings up, this, without this distinction between apprehender and apprehended, constantly just moving through. And this is what's meant by constantly moving through, everything being mind, everything being a product of our awareness. Wherever we are is where we practice. Whatever we see is what we practice. Whatever we hear is what we practice. Whatever we smell is what we practice. Whatever we feel from touching is practice. Whatever we think, whatever emotion arises, this is the ground of our variegated practice. There's nothing else. We don't need to make anything, say anything. We definitely don't need to run around with bells, and drums, making a lot of noise, ding, 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 throwing tormas at things. Just be here. And so I shared this in this Lions Roar piece because I wanted to demonstrate how being in a place like Rikers Island for 5 years was a really powerful place to practice. Right? So they had asked me, well, you got to tell everyone what you learned. And one of the things I learned was, it doesn't matter where I am. I can be in the most maximum security jail facility in New York City during some kind of intense, security event. Everybody's locked in, you can't move. And you need to pick up the kids. So can't move, can't attend to responsibility, have kind of, ungodly responsibility in this facility in this moment. The smell of chemical spray, the sound of people yelling, alarm bells going, people zooming around, people moving, being escorted who are injured, and being present. And then in that moment, Tilopa's words, to transcend the apprehender and the apprehended is the king of views. To be without distraction is the king of meditation. To be free from effort is the king of conduct. And to be without hope or fear is the king of results. This is what, I was at work and I was training. And this is really what, if we can't do that, then, not to be fatalistic, but like, what are we doing here? Right? And obviously it doesn't have to be Rikers Island. It could be wherever we are. As a parent, my wife is away for the rest of the week in DC as part of a fellowship, and I'm daddy duty full time. So that's great. That's a whole other kind of practice. Bath time before cha. Kind of thing. Dinner, bath time before cha. Let the kids play video games while I do cha, and then read with them, tuck them in the morning. I have a crazy meeting at 6:30 in the morning. Just do and do and move and move and move. Everything is practice. One doesn't obviously have to be a parent to practice. One can be without kids. As long as we're alive, and we're breathing, and we're thinking, and we're emoting, we have the ground. We have the basis for a practice. But to be able to do it without hope or fear, to do this without expectation for specific results, clarity, whatever it is, insight, whatever that means, transcendence, whatever that means. And of course, to do all of this without the need for recognition, and not because, not out of some like self-abnegatory kind of relationship to that. but because there's nothing particularly special about this. Right? This is the basis of our collective being. So why put fancy labels on? And how weird is it to train in this and say, oh, look at me. Every other being, human and non-human, is exactly the same. How weird. Be like, oh, now I should wear this shawl, have this title, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So this is something I wanted to share, but what I really wanted to kind of get into is this idea of conduct, Mahamudra, like so practicing, you know, in an engaged way. And what this actually isn't, right, is a set of new kinds of ethics we need, because it's not about that too. Right, and so I'm going to quote two people, Lama, who I love, and I love him for a reason I'm going to tell you in a sec, and then of course Miller, but Lama is really super dear to my heart because he was a warlord who was very, very destructive and was a great master of Mahamudra, an early master. He was a contemporary of Dusun Khenpa, the first Karmapa, um, and also Khenpopa's nephew Gomso, um, and was a student of Khenpopa himself. And he had this, experience of non-duality. It was quite profound. Became a very skilled teacher of Mahamudra as well. And the songs are super, super beautiful. And they actually were things that I used to keep in my pocket when I was volunteering on Rikers Island. I would bring his songs and read them on the bus, going from facility to facility, resting, to the nature of mind. But so he says, so these are this idea of 4 samayas in Mahamudra. And this doesn't connect to samaya in the kind of standard Vajrayana way. But he writes that there are 4 samayas of Mahamudra, right, or 4 commitments. And the first is that mental afflictions are not to be abandoned because they are your mind. Right? So the moment we experience agitation or dullness or scatteredness or even anxiety, exhaustion, low energy, sense of overwhelm, because we're not practicing tantra, there's nothing to do when these things come other than just go back to Tilopa's practicing without apprehender and the apprehended, just resting directly into the experience of mind of stupor, mind of dullness, mind of agitation, mind of scatteredness. This need to affect a change, this need to apply an antidote. Imagining that your practice is a petri dish, and whatever is blooming is beginning to bloom, happening, and it's getting all weird, So it's like all these strange colors, perhaps, or maybe like weird crystalline things are appearing, and then we might think, oh, I need to add this, right? And Lama Shang is like, he wants to smack your hand away. Be like, just leave it alone, right? This petri dish is the point. Just leave it alone. So he says, wisdom, the remedy does not need to be applied to the mind stream because it is not dual with those mental afflictions, right? So these mental afflictions, as they arise, are not separate. They're not invading. They're not, people hiding in the quarters of jail facilities, ready to assault you. They're not germs or viruses. They're not other than. So why start putting up walls? And then he says that suchness is not to be meditated on. So, because sometimes we'll say, oh, I need to really need to make some progress here in my Mahamudra. I'm going to meditate on suchness. And all of a sudden, here we are creating something. It's creating some kind of thing, some preferred direction, preferred expression. No, I don't like you scatteredness. I need suchness. Suchness is not to be meditated on because it is not a reference point. Any result is not hoped for because it is to be realized as one's own mind. So even the result. This one's hard, because we all put in a lot of time into our practice, seeking results. So when will the results happen? And I can definitely say there's nothing harder than being where I am, telling people, just throw out the need for results. You instantly see people's faces just kind of get sad. their perkiness begins to fade. And people are like, oh God, really? And I totally understand because as much as anybody else, have gone through phases of needing things to be better than they are, needing my practice to be transcendent and open. And, we create a real kind of fascinating split unintentionally sometimes by needing it to be bliss. I need the bliss. I need the bliss. I need the emptiness. I need it to be something other than this. It can't just be like a Tuesday afternoon, kind of weird gray Brooklyn day. No after school for the kids. Shortly after this, I need to go pick them up from school. And that's just what the day is. Got to be something else, man. Be the center of a mandala. Where's all the bliss and the crescendo and the all of that stuff. And there is no other stuff because it's just what it is. And so what's very fascinating to me is the application of these 4 smayas of Mahamudra. I know that I said that they're not, an ethics. But what happens if we begin to kind of apply these in a more outward fashion? Right? Stop looking for reasons to be better than I already am. Right? To stop looking for sources of refuge outside of my own experience. Stop looking at the need. So about this time last week, I had to go to the emergency room, and I found myself ironically kind of brushing up against just messaging with Rod later, brushing up against my genetics, my family, whatever, I mean, it's our health things. And I found myself so frustrated. I was like, oh man, like, this embodiment, it's been good up until now. Now I see all this stuff coming. And it's like, I can definitely see, like, how this is going to be with me for the rest of my life, and not in a kind of, terrible way, but in a way where it's like, oh yeah, right. I realized I thought I was squeaking through the cracks, you know. And so practice with that, which is what I did. I went to the ER, and I used to work in ERs, so I was then the patient, watching the nurses and the doctors and all the other technicians doing their work, and the elderly and the homeless and the drug addicted and everyone else coming in, and me being in a kind of much better place, specifically, in terms of my condition, right? Not that dramatic, but still concerning, you know. I'm practicing with that. This is the best Gompa. This is the best Dharma center. To not need the transcendent. Of course, I had my little monk bag and Dzogchen text with me in case I felt like nerding out. But it was more just being with things, watching people's faces, watching people carry themselves, their energy, watching people's anxiety, hearing people yelling, screaming, crying. But when we take this, mental afflictions are not to be abandoned because they are your own mind. This becomes everything, not just mental afflictions. Thought, anxiety, physical sensation, hope, fear, our relationship to those, drama. And so this opens up the whole world. And it opens it up in a way that, interestingly enough, I think removes fear, because all of a sudden, the machine is primed in the sense that the constancy of everything that we experience is the point of our practice. There's nothing to be afraid of because we've just kind of eased ourselves into this play, and everything that comes up, the mundane, the very weird car service I got into from the emergency room to come home with a very talkative strange man, like driving in an odd way, that coming home to my wife and then kids, and just being with that, calling my parents who are freaked out, being with that. Wisdom, the remedy, does not need to be applied to the mind stream because it is not dual with those mental afflictions. I don't know about you, but I want the world to be different. And I want people to be treated well, with respect, dignity. And sometimes they're not. And sometimes our culture reveals itself for being a very brutal place. And yes, there's a lot to organize around to change that. And being in this brokenness is also part of our practice. Being with our, the way this shows up in our bodies. Being able to open up to pain and suffering and frustration and exhaustion and anger and hopelessness in an honest way is also part of our practice. and actually seeing that there is wisdom even in that. Not to get lost in the constant transformation, constant need to evolve. It's funny, I didn't even know how much I believe in. I mean, obviously, evolution. I believe in the science, but the societal evolution. It's really hard to tell whether or not that it's actually a thing. Um, I'm not sure. Suchness is not meditated on because it is not a reference point. The result is not hoped for because it is realized to be one's own mind. We are the result. We are Buddha. We are Kuntazangpo. We are Aryatara. We are Medicine Buddha. We are Vajragrahi. We're it. And all this is it. So there's this, I like this, it's just 4 lines from a Milarepa song. So Milarepa sings, when biased thinking has vanished into space, no phony facades, no 8 worldly dharmas, nor hopes or fears. A keeper and kept, refined until they're gone. This way of keeping Samaya, it works quite well. Say that one more time. When biased thinking has vanished into space, no phony facades, no 8 worldly dharmas, no hopes or fears. A keeper and kept, refined until they're gone. This way of keeping Samaya, it works quite well. Keeper and kept. We think we need to hold. We think we need to maintain. We think we need to effort, but we don't. We just need to be. Refined until they're gone. Refined until it's just experienced as one thing. No phony facades. There's a lot of human activity, I'm sorry to say. It's phony facade. And I don't mean like phony, it's like, what's his name? Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. Although, who knows, maybe everyone's phony. But more this whole, like, I think the thing I've been really enjoying these days is looking at us humans as animals that need to make a lot of complexity about everything. Animals that are very uncomfortable in just being themselves. So they need to make the world around them theirs. We need to make the world in our own image, whatever image that is. Physical, political, spiritual. We're very, it's almost as if humans are very insecure. And what these instructions are pointing us into is chill out and relax and just be with what's coming up. Okay, animals. Okay, humans. Let the sun rise and let it set. You don't need to create a cosmology. Be directly in relationship to everyone who comes your way. let yourself think and feel without recoiling, thinking it should be something different, or that it's not okay. How could there possibly be things that are good or bad? So this is kind of what so there's a question, or there was a question. Something being written. Wondering if I might be able to reflect on conduct Mahamudra, integrating practice and activity in relationship to experiencing our window of tolerance and trauma speak. Yeah, I mean, I think all of this has to be. So what I think is that it's kind of like these instructions are grain alcohol, and they are not meant to be just consumed like willy-nilly. They're to be mixed with other things as per need. And we don't see this so much in the Mahamudra tradition, although I did read a really interesting kind of account of this in like the practice of Dzogchen, for example. There's a real kind of profitable place of pedagogy, of kind of pushing a student into this kind of direct experience of non-duality, and it clicks and gels, right? But it's also some of these kind of introductions in very specific kinds can be very destabilizing for people that just don't have the grounding to be able to perhaps even begin to understand that most human activity is relatively arbitrary and doesn't really have a whole lot of importance, perhaps. And so these kinds of things need to be imbibed in the way that's most realistic for people to actually, derive benefit from them. And so I think that it can be helpful to, everybody needs to be able to titrate these. I think on one level, everybody needs to be able to titrate all these kinds of instructions for themselves or their communities or whomever, in one way. And then in another way, the tradition also kind of says that, or suggests that these kinds of instructions are also self-secret, in the sense that they're very hard to fully grasp and understand. And because they're very hard to grasp and understand, those who can't understand them won't. So you don't need to worry so much about that. Although the interesting thing then becomes with Lama Shang, part of the controversy around him is that because he was a warlord and this kind of master of Mahamudra, non-dual mind, he made it his business to go around and destroy the monasteries of all non-Mahamudra practicing spiritual communities, and and then he would take the wood and the timbers and the bricks and the metal and make Mahamudra specific monasteries. And it got so out of hand that Disum Kempa, first Karmapa, was asked to intercede because they were Dharma brothers, and Gonsul had asked, Kampopa's nephew had asked Disum Kempa to, basically, like, you got to talk to this guy, man, because he's out of his mind. And he was just so like in his like non-dual, whatever is done is pure kind of like trip, that Disum Kempa was able to kind of rein him in a bit. So there is always kind of the risk of kind of taking this too far out there, either in terms of some kind of like complete lack of orientation around duality, good and bad in particular, um, which can be intense and scary for people. And then, of course, with respect to healthy, having the healthy boundaries we may need um, around trauma, then yeah, uh, it's helpful and important to do that. And then I think the other side of this, though, is to acknowledge the complexity of this interesting intersection at this time in history of Western cultural needs and Western psychological needs and non-dual Dharma. Because again, and I'm just saying this more to play like the devil's advocate, if we only protect our trauma, then we are reinforcing a storyline that ultimately isn't necessarily true. And so how to get to that truth in a way that I don't even really know if honoring the trauma is worth saying, acknowledging its existence and engaging the healing needed to be able to zoom right out of town. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like, without food or shelter, you really can, the basic needs, right? It's very hard to address psychological and emotional health, even though ironically those two things are tied into having basic needs met. And so if we're feeling traumatized, shut down, hurt, not respected, any number of things, it's totally okay. And then the question is how to heal, like in an oasis, going into an oasis to kind of fatten up a little bit, get your water fill, and then go off into the desert of non-dual practice. Because ultimately, and I did also write about this in this piece of Lions Roars, like, I don't think most of our situations these days can be solved using the systems that are in place because they rely so heavily on these intense binaries, right? And so there needs to be, for those who need the resourcing, but I think that we all need to probably begin to learn how to move into some other way of being if we're going to, try and make all of this work. So there's like a twofold benefit. I think there's the first is that this is very important for Dharma practice to be able to begin to dive or stick our toe in the experience of non-duality. But I think there is going to be more secondary benefit in terms of having skill around not creating undue friction and pain and harm in these systems that we have. But again, it won't really work until more people do it. I'm curious, does anyone have any questions or concerns? Or fear? Should we sit for a little bit? Yeah, okay. Let's do that. We'll sit for about 10 minutes. So my root teacher was a wonderful writer. She had a master's in English literature, which is kind of the most wonderful thing a Sikamese, Ani could have a master's in. Um, because it was just so, I mean, the way she expressed herself, the ease, the fluidity, especially though in the written word. And I have two letters from her. One was, written to her daughter, who's close Dharma sister of mine, and my Dharma brother Eric. And then the other one she just wrote to me. And in the one that, so she wrote this one to me, and then to all three of us, um, and then she wrote a third one, uh, which I was really excited to get and never did, and it got lost in the mail. And I was on the phone with her. It's like my last semester of college, and I was like, honey, yeah, this letter didn't get here. It's like, oh, that's weird, because I sent it, and should it be there? I was like, yeah, I know. And she's like, well, you're coming to India in a couple of months. I'll just, we can address everything that was in the letter when I see you. And I was like, okay, so, you know, go out to India and see her. And at that point, she was quite sick. And she's like, oh, yeah, the letter. She's like, well, I included the only meditation instruction you would ever need um, in that letter. And because it got lost, I'm not going to give it to you. You're going to have to learn this on your own and go the whole long route for yourself. I was just like, oh yeah, I think I need to go for a walk, be by myself for a little bit. Just because I was like, postal service, postal service bikini is like, took that letter and sent it back to Udiana. They're like, but it was good because like it meant, having to go through all of the hope and fear stuff, all of the anxiety stuff, all of these moments, when I first became a parent and I wasn't able to be spending as much time as I was in India. Because I'd be back here raising my eldest son Pico and being highly aware of everything that was happening, either Bokramche's monastery or the vicinity or, whatever, that I wasn't able to attend, all the teaching cycles offered, all the empowerments, all this, all of my own, like, oh God, one day, you know, um, and I remember very clearly, actually, Anizamo once told me about, I think his name is Lama Dorje, who runs the Kaju Center in Santa Fe. Sorry, yeah, I think in Santa Fe. And that he had told her at one point, I will never go back to Asia except if somebody's given the Rinchen Terza, like all the terma signatures. But other than that, he's done. He's good. And I bring all of this up because, we're really getting to this place of being able to see the Dharma in every single thing that occurs in our lives, the ordinariness, the being here in Brooklyn or whatever, is the point. And I'm not like, super adept, but I do now understand what Anizomo was talking about. And I do feel like I have finally made that loop, that whole journey. And it's taken 3 kids, 2 partners, all sorts of craziness, all sorts of hope and fear and exhaustion and anxiety and projecting into the future and all of this, to realize that you don't need to do any of that. And this is really kind of, what Mahamudra is about, like the recognizing that everything that we experience is just as it should be, just as it is, does not need modification, does not need adjustment. Um, in modern tantric Buddhism, like kind of as part of it, I had the time to translate a text, Mahamudra text by Maitreya, actually on Rikers Island. This is kind of like I had, do this over the course of a month or so when I had free time. And it felt important for me to translate it there on that island, because it is the most un-Mahamudra place most people can imagine, right? It's like 100,000 people per year pass through there, intense violence, intense reactivity, intense loss. I mean, somebody just died there. Another person in custody died there the other day. 7 deaths this year. It felt really important for me to put the stake down of Mahamudra into the ground there. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to translate Maitreya's Mahamudra Samkamita. Maitreya was Marpa's main Mahamudra teacher. But even then, it begins, the first line is, all phenomenon are one's natural mind. The perceived reality of the external world is rooted in mistaken mind. So easy to not get that. I'm going to just repeat it because Eric's eyes are closed so lovely. All phenomena are one's own natural mind. The perceived reality of the external world is rooted in mistaken mind. Like a dream, it is devoid of an entity. It is merely the movement of grasping and wakeful conscious awareness. Lacking inherent existence, it is like the manifestation of the wind, empty of essence, just like space. All that appears is equally space-like. This is said to be Mahamudra. Its essence cannot be taught. For this reason, the nature of mind, due to the very nature of Mahamudra, is free from fabrication or transformation. By what is realization of the essential nature made? The entirety of appearance is Mahamudra, the great all-pervading Dharmakaya. Relax into the uncontrived nature of being. Dharmakaya is beyond thought. Naturally remain in meditation without seeking. Meditation rooted in seeking is mistaken mind. Like magical illusions in space, meditation and non-meditation has vanished. How could there be freedom or non-freedom? In such a way, the yogin with realization through knowingness becomes liberated from all virtuous and non-virtuous karmas. Kleshas are great wisdoms. Like fire in a forest, they are the yogin's companion. How can there be any going or straying? Remaining in solitude, what meditative stability can there be? One who does not realize the nature of phenomena in mind never becomes liberated from circumstances. And we all know what this feels like. What could bind the realization of the essential nature? While undistractedly abiding, do not modify body, speech, or meditation, neither remaining nor not remaining in equanimity. It needs no contrived corrective measure, nor meditative cultivation. Having nothing to establish, know that whatever you experience lacks any real existence. Appearance is naturally liberated Dharma Dhatu. Realization is self-liberated great original wakefulness, non-dual, equal to Dharmakaya. Like the continuous flow of a river, however it abides, it is endowed with pure meaning. Likewise, it is continual Buddhahood. Samsara is non-referential great bliss. All phenomena are devoid of an entity. Being empty, the intellect is purified into its own essence. Mind being beyond concept, there is nothing more to be done. This is the path of all the Buddhas. How fortunate. I summarize the heart essence of the teachings. Through this, may all sentient beings without exception reside in Mahamudra. This concludes my Tripa's Mahamudra Samkamita. This is from the mouth of the same Pandita. It was translated by the Tibetan translator Marpa Choki Lodro. Translated into English by Ripa Dorje Ozer, the heinous aberration himself at the Mahashmasan, or Great Charnel Ground, known as Rikers Island. There's so many, this, is so beautiful. I received the transmission of this from Gyaltsen Rinpoche and from Ringo Tulku. And actually, I first learned about it from this text I somehow came across that 16th Karmapa had published, carved, into wood blocks and then printed and published. I think in Bhutan in the late 60s, early 70s, kind of like 7 really important Mahamudra texts. And that was the first time I came across it. And my Tripa is a huge kind of inspiration to me, but that song is so powerful. And of course, we can look at this in a kind of overly facile way and see it as, reductive. But I think that if we look a little deeper, we see how freeing it is. The only problem is that the looking deeply necessitates getting comfortable with everything that appears as being perhaps a little different than we tend to assume that it is. And once we can get a little loose and free that way, this actually becomes a healing balm and not a way of shutting down appearance, shutting down, authentic arousal, etc. So in one way, there's nothing to do other than just be open and present. And of course, for everybody who is banking on, the heavens opening and, somebody giving you fancy robes, well, I'm sorry. Because that's not what it's about, right? Like, it's just about being totally open and living in beauty, and the beauty being ordinary, and that ordinary being beauty, and that beauty being pervasive. Nobody owns it. It's no particular person's birthright. It's no particular culture's property. This is just free, open, released being. That's all it is. No crowns, no drums, no bells, no cymbals. And it has a way of transforming even the most kind of mundane things about, for example, the United States, that we just might find kind of like blah, strip malls. Strip malls become a treasury of bliss. Um, Las Vegas becomes a treasury of bliss. I actually had a chance to go to Las Vegas once, and was walking through, I don't know, one of the casinos there, and I was trying to offer up all of the sounds, all of the lights, all of the bells and the blips and the winning sounds of all of the, the machines, all the people, maybe all the subliminal like things trying to be like, aimed at people to spend more, do more, drink more, whatever. Go outside to the strip, this play of appearance. And it's quite extraordinary. I would, as problematic as he is, I would suggest people take a look at Osel Ten. There's this interview with Osel Tenzin, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, where he talks about, talking with the 16th Karmapa right before he died. And this was in Zion, Illinois. And he has this account of meeting with 16th Karmapa and being, obviously sad and scared and all of these things. And, Karmapa's like, even from the deathbed, he has to be at people's chapels. And it's like, why are you sad? And he's like, well, because such a great being like you is going to die. And then he says, nothing happens, and nothing happens because everything is, that's my addition. It's like nothing happens because there's no change. Nothing happens because any change we see is not real change. It's just change of appearance, change of, phase change, energy moving, awareness moving. And so also you find that Saraha, in one of his dohas, I can't remember which one, but he says, you don't need to go to Lanka to realize the nature of mind. And so like he's basically saying, like, you don't need to go somewhere to learn how to do this. It's right here. So even in Zion, Illinois in the early 80s, everyone was still kind of wearing bell-bottom style suits, and most men's clothes were just brown or navy, kind of blah. That was a perfect place to practice Mahamudra. This is the perfect place to practice Mahamudra. Wherever we are is a perfect place to practice Mahamudra. Wherever we end up is a perfect place to practice Mahamudra. However we are as we age, our body deteriorating, all of a sudden, our mortality is the only thing holding us together. That is the perfect place to practice Mahamudra. Our brokenness, our ordinariness, our, lack of shiny American culture success. It's a perfect place to practice Mahamudra. It's always now. So with that, maybe we can end here. I hope you guys are all doing okay and not falling asleep. And I want to thank you for your patience and everything. Um, yeah, and maybe we can dedicate the merit. May all beings be able to open their eyes and see the play of Mahamudra. May Mahamudra appearance meet with Mahamudra sound. May Mahamudra sound transform into Mahamudra touch, smell, etc. Since everything we experience is awakened mind, may all beings be able to recognize that where they are in this moment is a treasury of bliss. May all beings step into this treasury of bliss with certainty, power, confidence. And with this confidence, may we continue to be able to be available for others so that no one is forgotten and no one is left behind. Take very good care of yourselves. Be well. It's wonderful to see you, Kimberly. Take really good care and see you soon.